Hello folks, how's it going? We are in the middle of a new week, but I record these 2 days early, so this is on Monday, and I've just come back from a rather trying weekend of being ill all weekend, which hasn't been great. You know those weekends that you look forward to for ages, and then, you're like, oh, it's going to be great, and, you're worrying about getting work done and getting it out the way, so you've got time all weekend, and then the time gets there and it's a bust, either because of illness or somebody doesn't turn up or some drama happens or something. Well, that happened to me this weekend. It was just me being ill mostly, that kind of ruined it for me. So that was gutting. But on the Saturday, I did brave the town centre to go and play some OPR and had a fantastic game of one-page rules, which I really, really, really enjoyed. I won that game, which was good as well. And yeah, then immediately came home and wanted to throw myself headfirst into a tumble dryer because my body was betraying me yet again. But there we are. So hopefully you're having a better week. I'm on the mend now. Today's been the first day I've been able to keep food down for 2 days now. So that's good. I'm on the mend. I'm getting there. I'm feeling a bit better. Slept okay too. So let's dive into some hobby nightmares. Now, I was looking in my mailbag for a hobby nightmare that was... I didn't want to jump around different hobby nightmares. I wanted to go to one person, right, and just have a long hobby nightmare. And wouldn't you know it, Lithobius is here again with a nice long hobby nightmare. That's what she said. Getting into a painting hobby nightmare about a Games Workshop manager that they came across a few years ago, which I'm really looking forward to getting into. So, without further ado, let's jump in. And she says, hey North, Lithobius again. Hope things are going well for you. They are, yeah, they're getting better. I'm collecting a packet of short tales on my thesis writing days, but I'm sending this one in by itself as it's pretty long. It's also gone through several versions as it's the first nightmare I actually drafted to send in to you. Okay. As I listened to your channel, I developed a different perspective on these experiences as they centre around interactions with Warhammer store staff. Ultimately, I wonder if any experience came down to some aspect of Games Workshop manager training. So I'd love to hear your perspective on my paint-related nightmare. It might just be a kind of normal experience for a lot of customers with a certain type of manager. The only details about the Warhammer store itself I'm going to include, though, is that it's a North American shopping centre walking distance from at least one university, my own. I'm not looking to call anybody out, or put the store on blast, or whatever. Alright, prologue. I know some stuff about painting. First, I've given some background into my perspective recently, but mostly, I've experience on both sides of the counter. I'm currently in grad school full-time. I implied I'm in a STEM field, and I'm painfully American. However, a few other background details are necessary to see why my Warhammer store experience was so frustrating. Like you, I have done a bit of career change later in life. You've mentioned your birth date and year previously, and it turns out I'm only a few months younger than you. You're a golden oldie like myself. I think we started to transition at similar ages. What do you mean? What are you getting at? I didn't transition from anything, my friend. I've always been handsome. No, I don't know. I don't know what you mean. Anyway, I think we started to oh, you mean careers, right? I thought you hinting at something there, like you assumed I was trans or something. I think we started the transition at similar ages, but the whole process has been and will be longer for me. My undergraduate degree is not in STEM, but in art, from the type of program where you spend the majority of your credits in the studio rather than in textbooks. I'm sure you prefer that though. If you're going to do textbooks, you do history of art, right, rather than doing anything else. I only took 2 science courses during my program and tested out of the math requirement entirely. Woman after my own heart here. How and why I went from one to the other is its own essay, but the experience is important here, not only to emphasise that not only do I know a thing or two about colour, theory, painting, sculpting and so on, but I have spent a lot of time in critiques. In these intense sessions, The entire class tacked our work to the wall and went down the line, discussing every piece. This experience was formative, as I gained a thicker skin and internal separation from my work, as well as the technical knowledge of how to choose or modify elements of a composition that would convey the story I envisioned. So, talking about art in a highly technical way is something I'm quite proficient at through training. Honestly, it's been quite hard to write in a way that expresses my point of view without sounding arrogant. I want it to make it clear here that, number one, I am painfully aware that I have a lot to learn about everything art related, otherwise I'd have a pile of golden demons sitting on my shelf, not grinding away as a grad student in a different field entirely. Number two, I don't expect random people to know anything about me, so this isn't, do you know who I am, or anything. Number three, I also have taught art to high schoolers and PhD level scientists, so I'm also used to discussing art with non-experts and expect any given person to not know what I know, since I don't know what they know. Dude, are we like the same person, but you're like a different gender and in different fields? That's insane. And number four, an art degree or being good at art doesn't necessarily translate to miniature painting. Otherwise, I'd have a pile of golden demons, as I said earlier. My non-miniatures art style is inspired by not just cool game art, but painters like JMW Turner's later work, optional Wikipedia link to a relevant painting. Look at you trying to educate me. To summarise the common attributes, there are pictures of real things that are somewhat abstracted, with a lot of visible mark making from thick paint and ink, like really, really thick in some places. Visible brushstrokes and strong texture is pretty much the opposite of how miniatures should be painted. So no, I'm not winning golden demons, probably ever. If for no other reason, that my thin paint always gets the comment, do you thin your paints? And North, I do think I thin them a lot, because for me, they are thinned a lot. Even sketching with a pencil or pen makes a messy drawing that's more of an idea of a thing rather than the thing I was looking at and trying to copy realistically. So yeah, no. The whole I went to art school thing is more about how I talk about art and what I know than using it as evidence I'm just a good mini painter and why the Warhammer employee was mean to my fifis, sad face emoji. Number 5, and finally, this will probably be a hot take, but I'm not including any pics of my minis with this hobby nightmare. I've been on the internet and in hobby spaces long enough to know that for more than a couple of my very local viewers, it will boil down to whether my painting is good enough for me to have an opinion. If they're relevant in future nightmares, I'll send some in then. There's at least one photo floating around on Discord if anybody is insatiably curious and wants to tell me to thin my paints first. I think I've seen that model. And I remember all bad ones, and I don't think your name is attached to one. Oh, Yorkshire tea. The worst thing about being ill is not being able to do your favourite things, like drink Yorkshire tea. Anyway. Ultimately, grad school drains my mental energy so much that it is difficult to create my own art from scratch. But I go crazy without a creative outlet, so painting minis is one of my ways to relax. I don't care if they're good objectively, I just want to play games with them and when I'm done, and enjoy the process. But the story really starts before... Sorry, I'll read that again. A page change there. But the story really starts a bit before I started getting the itch to paint minis again. It was fall of 2019, autumn to normal people. I had just moved to the city for grad school while exploring the jungle for shopping plazas. I discovered my first Warhammer store. Visit the first. Everything has changed. You read that right, my first Warhammer store. I was in my early 30s and had never even been inside a dedicated Games Workshop store before. I didn't even know they existed. Like most friendly local game stores, the one I worked at had a small paint rack, a shelf of 40k, and that's about it. But turning the corner to find a glass case full of beautifully painted minis and tables full of epic battles and painted terrain made me feel 11 years old again. It had been so long since I worked on my backlog that my old pots and bottles had long since dried up. When I got the paint rack, all the colour names were different. There were different types of paint that I'd never heard of. What in the hell were inks? So I was staring at this entirely unrecognisable paint rack when the store guy finished up with another customer and noticed my confusion. You might guess what will happen next. So take a sip of a beverage and give it a shot. Alright, I will do. I think he's going to come over and start explaining to you what the hobby is and, like, talk down to you. Let's just say he'll talk down to you. Let's be polite. He's going to talk down to you quite a bit. You know, I'm not... how do I put this? You know, you'll never answer this, right? Like, because it'd be arrogant to do so. But do you consider yourself good looking? Because if you do, then that might influence my response. Because he might stride over to you, trying to impress you with his, you know, his knowledge of this thing that you're kind of interested in. I've seen that happen quite a lot. It's like, oh yeah, well, you know, I know more than you. But every time a guy does that, and I've seen it happen, it completely backfires. Because you don't half sound like a douche when you do it. Don't do that, guys, right? Excite, enthuse, inform. Inform? What am I doing? What am I doing? Like, what kind of brain do I have? Like, what's going on? Excite, enthuse, and inform. That's what I meant to say, right? Those are the three main rules of getting somebody into anything. If you want to impress somebody with your knowledge of anything, from history to Warhammer to whatever, excite them, and put enthusiasm in them, and then inform them. Do those three things, and you'll be alright. And you can do all of those three things by just being really passionate about the hobby that you like, with a smile on your face. Job done. Going over and wagging your finger at them for picking the wrong paints probably isn't the way to go. Anyway, I can guarantee whatever you just came up with, you're wrong. For now at least. Because this was an awesome experience. He showed me a key to match the old and new colours, and demoed contrast and technical paints on some of his in-process models, and just generally got me excited about painting minis again. I even bought a pot of Typhus Corrosion because, even if I didn't have my minis in the apartment to work on, I loved its effect so much that I didn't want to forget which one it was. It was my second visit that was the nightmare, and the third. And now I creep around trying to see who's working if I'm thinking about going in. After that visit, things got busy between research and taking a class, so the pot sat unopened. But the promise that maybe next semester I'd look through my old minis and see what I felt like doing. The minis and hobby tools didn't make the move with me, and were living with my partner instead. We didn't get to move together largely because he has a decent job in the old city, and I don't know where I'll get a job after. So rather than upend our lives in just a few years, I split my time between the cities. Yeah, it sucks. The point is, I have a lot of minis and tools, but they weren't with me, which started to matter in March 2020 for obvious reasons. Yeah. The curse of Nurgle came down, obviously. Those early days, are a blur, but eventually non-essential stores cautiously reopened, if in a limited fashion. I desperately needed time away from screens during the eternal Zoom U, but my apartment is so small, minis were about the biggest things I could manage to work on. My building tools, basing supplies, and existing box of Chaos Demons and D&D minis were still a couple of 100 miles away, so I needed a pre-built mini. Fortunately, I found a giant centipede for Dungeons and Dragons. But the store I bought it at didn't have any paint in stock. I thought about the great convo I had with the employee last time and planned a trip to the Warhammer store. Visit the second. The worst paint brand ever. I already knew what paints I wanted to buy, because I'd planned out the paint scheme after my favourite pet centipede, RIP. Sand-coloured scutes, plates on her back, pale legs and belly, a dark stripe along the black margin of each segment with an orangey red head and terminal legs, her tail. This species actually blends in well into the desert despite its red head, which warns potential predators it will bite back. Animals are my speciality in art, so I have thought a lot about the variety of browns and greys and tans that go on their bodies. I know which one is right when I see it. So, that was my plan. Take one pot of each yellowy, orangey, sandy brown colours and sort them into piles until I got the groupings that were right. Then find a good dark brown for the stripe and outlines. Of course, I looked at the colour list online, but got overwhelmed with the names and not being sure how well my screen reflected the actual colours, and decided to just sort the pots physically. Of course, I put them away when I was done. I'm not a total monster. Okay, that's good, that's good. Well, maybe YouTube would have been better for you. You know, I do this all the time. I enter in a paint name and just painting tutorial and then just click it on YouTube and it always comes up with something, and you can see how it's going to look under dry conditions, under an ink, right? Under different undercoats. Yeah, there's tons of stuff out there you could be looking at. Anyway, so I wandered down to the local Warhammer store after work and found out that their COVID precaution was to bar the entrance with a few fold-out tables. Customers would come up to the tables and tell staff what they wanted to look at instead of entering the store. This location is in a mall, so it was an effective strategy for a one-employee store to ensure they couldn't accidentally go over the legal customer limit, which was still very low. But it meant I couldn't look at the oranges and browns and such without bothering anybody, and the rack wasn't near the table. I would have to ask the guy for every single pot I wanted to look at. Having been the person on the other side of the counter showing people one magic card after another, after another, after another from the case, I know I'm about to be one of those customers. I bite down a bit of anticipatory social anxiety and just approach the tables. I notice it's not the guy I remember. Let's call this one Pierre. Compared to the first guy, Pierre seems to have a much more reserved demeanour, but that doesn't bother me since I imagine playing Gopher with the entire inventory isn't his ideal day, if you know what I mean. He asks what he can bring over, and I immediately apologise and ask for a pile of paints in these colours, so I can figure out exactly which ones match my plan. This doesn't seem to bother him much as I feared it would, and he brings over all the different colours I'm looking for. Yeah, man, he just puts them in a big tub, brings them over. You know, he could actually let you do that whilst he attends to another customer at the same door. It'd be quite easy to do. I quickly sort most of them. Avalan Sunset, too bright. Zandri Dust, too green. Karak Stone, Screaming Skull, maybe. Now that there's an assortment of options, I check against my reference picture. He watches me for a bit, and seems to conclude that I did actually have a plan for something specific when I sorted the colours quickly into triads of base layer highlight. Pierre seems genuinely interested as he asks what I'm painting. Well, that's cool so far. I told him a D&D centipede for now. Big mistake. Big mistake. I don't tell Games Workshop staffers if I'm painting something that's not Citadel. I'm fully aware that most of them wouldn't care, right? I wouldn't care. Like, I sold models, paints, anything to D&D players. I didn't care, right? I would talk about role-playing D&D. I'd talk about any game you wanted to talk about in my store. Whatever you wanted to talk about, if you were going to buy models from me and paints from me for that game or that whatever you're going to do, I didn't care. It's fine. I was told off for that. I was told that's not the thing you need to do. It's welcome to our worlds, not welcome to everybody else's worlds. That is the quote. That is a quote I'm giving you there. You know, but that didn't make any sense to me. What if a D&D person wants some, you know, Agrax Earthshade to null down his skeleton warriors? I don't know, man. It just seemed a bit odd to me, but there we go. By the way, Games Workshop as a company started out selling other people's models and paints and stuff. That's literally how they built their business. So, you know. Yeah. I told him a D&D centipede for now, and you could feel the interest drain away. Okay. I never even finished assembling the Chaos Demon box I bought like 10 years ago, so I'd never actually played Warhammer and wasn't planning an army. I was just a random D&D minis person, but I was clearly going to buy something, maybe even quite a few things, so he feigned a bit of interest, but his tone had become flat and disaffected, no longer on the edge of nerd excitement. I showed him the reference pictures I was using, and we worked out what the sandy colours were fine. We went through a few reds for the head, then it was time for the stripes. He had brought over the browns, but they were all too light or had too much chrome overall, closer to red and orange than the intended dark but warm. The blacks were too flat on their own. Dude, okay, right. Lithobius, I'm going to be honest, right? For a really small project, for a non-Citadel game, you know, when he might have other things to do, I give every customer, like, you know, it depends really. Like, I would give every customer 5 to 10 minutes of my time, you know what I mean? And then I'd go off and do other things, right? But if you had, you know, I'm getting into the hobby, I'm doing this and doing that, I would sit there with you all day, man, and like, have a good time with you. But in a situation like this, you know, there comes a time when it's the law of diminishing returns, right? He's putting in a lot of effort into making sure you get what you need. And you know what he's going to get for that in his till? About 20 bucks. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I know it sounds wrong. It sounds really bad. But looking at it from like a business perspective and a manager's perspective, if this was me doing this, I would have checked out by now as well. I'd have been like, okay, right, you know what? Why don't I show you? I couldn't do this because you were in COVID, but what I would do, I would show you to the paint section. I'd start you off with the first few paints, and then let you do that as I go off and do other things, right? And I go and look to other customers. But this situation, he's in between a rock and a hard place. He can't leave, can he? Because it's COVID, so he's got to stand there with you. But I can see why he's getting a bit exasperated if he is. Because it's like, this isn't quite the right black. This isn't quite the right red. This isn't quite the... You're like, dude... You're going to spend, what, 10, 15 bucks? Can you just pick one? This is retail, right? This is retail. The blacks were a bit too flat on their own. Just plain black. Okay, time to ask his professional opinion about this. And he seemed old enough to remember the old Reaper colours too. Maybe he'd know the right two to mix at least. I quote, "So, I don't see any black-brown here. That's the right shade I'm looking for. There used to be one by Reaper I'd use on everything. It was called Walnut Brown. Are any of these paints similar to that in the colours you have?" The passion was back, suddenly and forcefully. But instead of nerd excitement, it was as though I'd broken open his display case to throw his Tyranids at random shoppers passing by. "Reaper," he says. "Those are the worst paints. They're awful and you should never use them." Unquote. And North, at this point, my memory gets very hazy, so I'm afraid I don't remember exactly why he hated Reaper paint so much. Just that he did, and I didn't need paint from any other brand other than Citadel. When somebody starts lecturing me and talks at me instead of with me, my natural response is to zone out and disassociate. My memory of this moment is from the outside, looking at myself, holding a triad of yellowish browns. I'm trying to say something, but he doesn't even acknowledge that I'm trying to speak. It's like the fact I used to use Reaper paints meant I needed to have extremely basic things explained to me, when before it seemed like a fairly normal interaction between two people who knew quite a lot about what they were talking about. My memory becomes first person again around the time he started lecturing me about what colours I should use for insects, because, and I quote, "Citadel makes an incredible range of bright colours and gem tones. I can get the, and I quote, perfect blues and greens to make beetle wings and dragon scales look really like emeralds," unquote, or something. And that I should be using black instead of black-brown for gemstone insects anyway. But I'm not painting beetles. The species doesn't have any kind of gem tone, and nothing I say about arthropod scute pigmentation or my personal experience with the centipede at hand matters to him either. True black in animals that you might paint with Abaddon black is rare because, like blue, true black is structural colorization. This means there is a physical structure on the surface of the feather or exoskeleton or hair that takes advantage of the physics of light on its surface rather than, or in addition to, any pigment produced inside the structure. In person, the resulting true black tends to look vaguely or strangely matte, like Vantablack, because the light is not only being absorbed but scattered through microstructures. That's so interesting, dude. That's really interesting. Most animals, including the centipede in my reference picture, get what we interpret as black from high concentrations of brown and or red pigment, combinations of different types of melanin. I used to own one of these centipedes. Her stripes weren't structural true black, but had a reddish dark brown. As an aside, that's not to say there isn't a place for a colour like Abaddon Black when painting animals, or that people who pick that colour to put on horses or rats, or the specific species of centipede are wrong. Just that I personally have reasons for selecting black-brown for my style of animal painting from artistic and scientific experience. I also know, now, he should have sold me Cygor Brown or Gagrak Sewer. And more info about how contrast paint is not the ink I was used to, and instructions on how to use it for this application, or recommended something like Corvus Black with Agrax Earthshade on top. Both Gagrak Sewer, Corvus/Agrax, or Corvus/Gagrax Sewer have made my trial and error Citadel only solutions to pigment paste blacks for animals, no thanks to any Games Workshop employee, but that Reaper paint did exactly what I wanted, right out of the bottle, in one layer. But no, I'm pretty sure Pierre didn't hear anything I said on the topic. I'd ceased to be a person a few paragraphs ago anyway. I'm picking the wrong colours, and it seems like even though Citadel's range is flawless and perfect and amazing, and most importantly not Reaper, they don't make the black-brown I'm looking for. I don't have time for this, or energy. I need to leave. But I don't know anywhere else that sold model paints yet since my exploration of the city had been cut short by lockdown. I also didn't feel like having an expensive package stolen from the non-secured mail area in my building. I'm having a hard time remembering exactly how I managed to end the interaction. He wasn't actually listening to me, so I don't think I said anything to wrap it up. It's more likely I had sorted my paint into the yes and no pile, and moved the yes pile close enough to him that I realised he should just go and ring it up. Pierre definitely had the last word, telling me to bring the model by if I run into any trouble, and to show it to him when it's done. I'm sure I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, but just said, okay, sure, fine, so that I could just leave. So the only remaining memories of that day are putting the box into my backpack, feeling really crappy and not very excited, glad that my mask hid that my typical RBF, resting bitch face, had turned to ABF, actual bitch face, while I dragged myself back to the apartment. I tried to pump myself up and not let a frustrating employee interaction ruin my hobby time. Dude, I think I've had a very similar interaction at my local game store, right? So, there are two local game stores near me, both run by Games Workshop employees, well, ex-Games Workshop employees. One of them is brilliant, and he's a nice guy. The other one won't stop talking. Like, literally, will not stop talking. He will go on, and on, and on, and even if he's not saying things like, you know, I'm the greatest man in the world, right? His tone, and the way he says things, and the way he seems to know things about Games Workshop that, you know, you're like, oh, okay, right? That he's probably heard, like, from elsewhere, just makes you go, oh, dude, shut up, right? Just shut up. This is what it is, dude. But you get it from different people. But there are two different types of Games Workshop employee that have left the company and gone to do model things on their own. There's nice guys who left because, you know, they couldn't take it anymore, or they just felt they wanted their independence. And there are guys who are still company guys, but they work for different companies now, right? Avoid the second form of those people. Visit the third, A Tale of 1,000 Browns. A few weeks later, I was enjoying myself enough that I had picked up a few bears and other small critters. I think I might have mentioned earlier that I think a lot about browns on animals. Bears are very brown, so are bats, and red-tailed hawks. But none of the animals I picked up were sand brown like my centipede and its base, so I was in need of a few more colours. Given that exploring the city still wasn't much of an option, and the game store I got the minis at still didn't have a lot of paint options, I began convincing myself that maybe my last visit to Warhammer store was just a very bad day. Pierre had been spending his days fetching boxes for people, and was probably just a bit irritable. If I don't mention Reaper, I'll probably be fine. Plus, I was in the mall for another reason, and the tables were gone, so I'll be able to look through the rack at my leisure, and maybe the other guy will be working. I lined up the animals I wanted to paint, their reference pictures and a list of Citadel paints. Now that I had been painting in that apartment for a while, I had learned a few things. First was that the air was so dry, I had to buy body lotion for skin for places I know I... What? Okay, first was the air was so dry in there, I had to buy body lotion for skin for places I didn't even know could crack. Where are we talking about? I'm alarmed right now. Even the skin inside my nose... Whew, okay, alright, that's fine. Even the skin inside my nose was cracked so badly, I got bloody noses easily every other day. Did you know you can get anemic from nosebleeds? I do. Anyway, the Saharan air meant not only a wet palette worked well enough to make mixing my colours economical, a thick skin would form over the top, so even though the part contacting the paper and sponge was still nice and wet, most of the paint was already lost. It was most practical and economical to rely entirely on layers and washes from out of the pot colours. While I still wasn't sure if Baneblade Brown or Rhinox Hide were the right choices until I flipped the pot over, this time had a more focused list, and I'd know what I had at home. As I get closer, I see Pierre is working, but helping another customer. I sneak in and start sorting paint from my list. I get my pile uninterrupted and place them next to the register as the other customer leaves with a couple of boxes of models and a smile on his face. Great, seems like good vibes all around. He starts scanning my pots, Pierre I mean, and lets me know that since I have 9, I can get one more for the... What? I can get one more for the buy 10 deal, so I turn around and get one more. I laugh as I hand in the pot, saying something along the lines of, and I quote, "There's so many colours I can always get one more. I like how most of the browns I need are already right out of the pot." There, something good about his products. He'll be happy and go, "Yup, Citadel models and paints are great, aren't they?" Unquote. And I'll be on my way with everybody happy and confirmed that the last time was just a bit of a bad day. "You can mix any colour you need," he says. Yeah, I know, it's just too dry in my apartment to... You just use a wet palette. He's looking at me like I'm an idiot for not knowing not only that you could or should mix paint, but for not using the most obvious solution, which definitely always works in every situation. Here we go again. I quote, No, I have been. It's so dry that it doesn't matter in my apartment. It's really best to just use it out the pot colours. So it's great that Citadel has so many options." Unquote. You're trying, lass. You're trying. You're trying your little heart out. Come on, guys. Just accept I'm tossing you a softball to end the conversation. Yes, it sure is great. Take my money and get me out of the store. You clearly don't want an idiot who doesn't know that paint can be mixed, wasting your precious time, so just let me go. But no. That'd be too easy. Instead, I'm clearly just using my wet palette wrong. Maybe it's the wrong paper. I'm not wetting the sponge enough. I could just use Tupperware. Blue and red make purple, so red and yellow make brown. You make any brown you want. It's just basic colour theory. Have you ever seen a colour wheel? And my eyes are glazing over. At some point, instead of trying to participate in the conversation as he lectured over me, I just switched to responding with variants of, "I'm aware, yes. I know. Dude, this is a nerd who's trying to impress a woman. Sorry. You know, this is just what it is. I know you're not going to see it that way. Because, you know, it's remarkable how many geeky women are totally oblivious to flirtation. Do you know what I mean? I bet a nerd would be standing there watching this guy do this and be like, you know, was he moving his arms? I'm serious. Like, was he moving his arms? If he was moving his arms, he's trying to get laid. No, I'm serious. If he's got one hand in his pocket and he's moving his arm around the other arm as he's trying to explain things, he's probably trying to get laid. He's trying to impress you with his knowledge, right? But because he's a nerd, and technically you're doing things wrong, he's being aggressive without realizing he's being aggressive, right? You know, he thinks he's being dashing. Anyway. While I can hear your viewers yelling at their screens or in the car that I need to be a bit more assertive, stick up for yourself, cut him off, leave the store, he doesn't need my business, at this point I expected it, so I was ready and didn't just leave my body. I also hadn't been able to explore the city for more places to buy this specific, specialised product. The places I had been to so far only sold cards, and again, I didn't want a package of expensive hobby supplies stolen from my apartment mail area, so no, I wasn't going to walk out, I needed these products. I was assertive, I did interject, I made sure I squared my shoulders, lined them up with my hips for a strong, confident posture, and looked at his face. At one point, I even included technical colour theory terms in my response, like chroma and hue, so maybe we could move on from, have you ever seen a colour wheel before? But let's be honest, at that point, I could have showed him a pic of me holding a Slayer sword on an award stage, and he would continue with, if you add white, you get a lighter colour. I think the main reason I got out of there this time was that another customer wanted to buy something. At that point, we'd gone through the transaction and all the paints were in my bag, as I left feeling irritated and honestly kind of bad about giving the store money. I realised I'd have to avoid them again if possible. One data point could be an anomaly, but two suggested a trend. At least for Pierre, anyway. Alright, our last point. Enough data points for a plot. Okay. This section here has brief highlights from the couple of years since then, ending with my most recent visit, after which I think I've drawn my conclusions, and I'm curious if I'm on the right track. Anyway, in a decent sized city, there has to be another place that sells paint, surely. So I've been exploring other game stores, even if they are a bit of a trip away from me. I found two other places reachable by public transit, two about 30 minutes away that sell Army Painter and Citadel, and one amazing store gaming cafe a little over an hour away that sells pretty much every brand from the more typical Citadel Army Painter to Vallejo, AK, Pro Acryl, Dirty Down, Green Stuff World, etc. So, I don't feel tied to the Warhammer store for paint anymore. I also have had conversations about paint with employees in the 1 hour away store that was very productive, and they were incredibly nice. Okay. That's great. Helping to find the exact colour I needed for a project and explaining the difference between some of the brands and their product lines. You know, things I actually want to learn about when I talk to people about the hobby. In a way, that was a two-sided conversation rather than a lecture from on high. However much I like those stores. Sorry, that's me being a retard. Sorry. My eyes are getting tired. However much I like those stores though, the Warhammer store is a 15-minute walk from work, and sometimes I just need a specific colour and can't give up my whole evening going to another part of the city for one bottle. Or they close too early. In the times I have gone since, I don't talk to anybody if I can help it. I look at the products, I don't need help thanks, I get my stuff and I go. Which seems to be the goal based on previous hobby nightmares. Pierre doesn't talk to me either, often not even asking me if I needed help, like he's probably supposed to. I don't know if he recognises me or not, and I don't care. You're not wearing a mask anymore, are you? Have you thought about that? The resting bitch face you say you have? Right? you're not wearing a mask anymore. So if you walk in there with a face like thunder, you're probably thinking, nope. But a few weeks ago, I went in to find a few contrast paints for some scenery. A different guy, let's say Farron, was working and asked me what I was looking for. In a previous visit, I ended up talking to him about paint when I was clearly staring at the rack for too long. Farron had asked what I was working on, a technique I learned in a sales job back in the day where your cold open doesn't allow the customer to say yes or no. In line with some of my reservations, I still had to explain why I wasn't using a specific technical paint when, it would give you the effect you want in just one coat. But we had a real actual two-sided conversation, though he still didn't really seem to understand what I was doing by the end. Well, there's no crime in that, sometimes you just get your wires crossed. This time, I blurted out the fact that I was hoping to get, without thinking, immediately feeling a stab of nervousness because I was still in never talk to anybody in Warhammer Store mode. North, he actually pointed out which contrasts would get those colours and what kind of effects people use each orange or yellow for. The stuff you can't tell when looking at the swatch. When I mentioned that I was trying to remember which Vallejo colour I put on the other part of the model to colour match, he said something like, and I quote, "Your hobby is your hobby, use whatever paint you want," unquote. And we talked about armies and lore for a bit too. Yeah, this is how you're meant to do it, man. I've known Games Workshop managers who are obsessed with not even letting you discuss anything but Citadel in store. Nah, dude, like the amount of sales you lose by just not allowing people to shop how they like, it's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Anyway, so while overall through our conversations about contrasts, he wasn't as helpful or friendly as the employee from the faraway store or the original mysteriously never seen again Warhammer Store employee, I finally didn't feel like garbage leaving the store or slightly resent my purchase. However, based on my creeping every time I passed the store, multiple interactions with 3 employees in 2019, and having listened to many hobby nightmares, here is what I think. I'm convinced at this point, Pierre is the manager. Dude, I could answer that question in 1 second if you'd tell me what kind of t-shirt he was wearing. Was it black? If it was, then yes, he was the manager. I'm convinced at this point Pierre was the manager. I think he's worked there the whole time I've been visiting the store, whilst Farron seems to have replaced the original guy. There actually might have been a time in the pandemic where it was only Pierre. He behaves significantly differently than either subordinate, even when it's only him. I'm not sure that this difference is just personality, because it seems to line up with the attitude that has been outlined as ideal for Games Workshop managers. That is, disdain for customers, pay and get out attitude, never mentioning his own hobby in any way, not trying to tailor the suggestions to the customer's needs and intended goals, and so on. The only thing he didn't do was try to sell me a starter box. Oh, he would have, if you didn't have a resting bitch face. But no, so basically, I've ever told anybody, I don't think I've told on the channel, my first interactions in a store, right? So my manager wanted to sit there and watch me do my first couple of interactions with customers. And my first interaction, dude, I lucked out so much, right? So the girl came in, right? And was my age, right? Was literally, my type, right? Let's put it that way, my type. And came in bubbly, we started getting along straight away, having a lot of laughs, just talking back and forth, and then went on to the hobby, right? So I was, flirting my ass off, trying to get a sale, going really well. And not only that, all of that, she collects Grey Knights. Because at that time, Sisters of Battle hadn't come out in plastic yet. So she wanted plastic miniatures that kind of look like Sisters of Battle, and so she decided on Grey Knights. So we're talking about Grey Knights, and she asked me, what do I do for my hobby? And I said, haha, I do Grey Knights, right? So we're right into this conversation, we're having a really good time, and she goes with the start collecting Grey Knights box set, gets a load of paints, right, a load of different bits and bobs, and heads out the store on her merry way, right? I'm behind the counter, slightly regretting not asking her for a number, especially when she walks outside and glances backwards and smiles at me, and I'm like, damn, I can't just run out the store because my manager's sitting there at the painting table, looking at me, waiting for me to come back and do a debrief with him. So I'm just like, bye, you know, kind of a thing. And I walk back over to my manager. And I'm expecting some praise, right? He tells me that was one of the worst interactions with a customer he's ever seen, and I clearly have a lot of stuff to work on. Yeah. He said I spent around 50 to 60% of the conversation talking about my own models. Now, number one, no, I didn't. Right? Literally, no, I didn't, because I brought this up to the girl later on, and yet she also said, no, you didn't. It was fine. It's fine. And also, like, literally, I don't know, dude. And by the way, I was answering questions about my models. Why? Because she wanted to know how to paint her models like mine. She wanted exactly the same silver that I had, but she wanted a purple hint over the top. So I showed her Druchii Violet and a few other things that she could use to water it down to make it a very, very faint purple. She got the army that she wanted, she got the paint that she wanted, she got the results that she wanted, and eventually, a few weeks later, I did actually get her number. But I started dating somebody else, so obviously I'm not a rat. So I texted her and said, listen, met somebody, blah blah blah, and you know what? She was still cool, still friends, and all good above board there, right? But at the same time, I was told by my manager that was the worst interaction I've ever seen, or one of the worst interactions I've ever seen. You have a lot to work on. All you did for 60% of the conversation was talk about your own models and your own hobby. Dude, no I didn't, number one. And number two, everything I was showing her, right? He even had to go at me because I showed her a picture of my models on my phone. And I said, listen, she was describing... When she was describing her finish of her models, I was like, it's exactly what I painted. So I showed her what I did, and she said, yes, that's what I want. Oh my god, you painted it already, right? We were having such a good conversation. It was a really good conversation. And, so anyway, it was a successful sale. I got loads of KPIs, because she bought loads of beginner stuff, right? She went away happy, and she came back to the store to do some modelling and painting and things like that. Eventually, obviously, the manager drove her away because she couldn't stand him, so she went elsewhere, to another place nearby. But it is what it is. But yeah, there we are. That just shows how they're trained, how they think, how the old guard tend to think at Games Workshop, unfortunately. Especially if they've been at the company for 10 or more years. Dude, they're going to be ingrained. You can't really sack them. It'll cost too much money. So they just stew and fester. Like a wound that's going wrong, that's getting infected. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Anyway. While I don't know other people's experiences with this particular person, I've come to think a lot of the problems I have, I had above, might come down to management training and level to which he seems to have bought in. It seems like on previous Hobby Nightmares, if you last a long time as a manager for Games Workshop, you either manage to keep your head down, or you are a good fit, as you already agree or come to agree with the company positions and attitudes, even if they're against the customer. Alternatively, the other employees are not subject to the management training and have the freedom to handle interactions their own way when he isn't around. So they seem more like actual people, as though they're on the same level as us and thinking of us as equals rather than looking down at us mere hobbyists. And furthermore, that employees and managers of friendly local game stores have several more degrees of freedom than even the regular employees, who seem constrained in some way. You're 110,000% correct. You are absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. It's exactly what it is. My perspective on these interactions just a few months ago when I started this draft was very different. First I thought the Hobby Nightmare was just Pierre, then it seemed to be that the Warhammer store in general wasn't a great place to chat with the employees. I've been thinking maybe it was just me in particular. I do something wrong when talking about paints, or this is just how these interactions go for everyone. Until I went to the faraway store, when I remembered what a healthy interaction on the topic is. I realised I wasn't doing anything wrong at all, so I thought maybe it was this store. Then I listened to Hobby Nightmares, where it seemed that managers who behaved like friendly local game store managers were being actively run out, and the difference between the pressure being put on a manager and a regular Games Workshop staffer. So now I'm curious about what your perspective is on this. If Pierre is a typical Games Workshop manager, if something like this is how you're trained to talk about pots and paints and products with people. I should expect to be talked at more frequently than talked with, or if maybe I did do something wrong. There's only so assertive you can be if the other person isn't listening though. Anyway, thanks for reading this monster of a tale, and hopefully the holiday craziness hasn't taken over your house too much. At least the holidays mean we're getting close to the solstice. Then there will be more sunlight to paint by. Lithobius. Alright, cheers dude. Well, I've kind of answered your questions already. But no, you didn't do anything wrong. I mean, at the start of the COVID thing, when you're asking him to go back and forth with paints, that was a bit much, but that's not your fault. You know, that's basically, you know, just how it is when it comes to customers and COVID and all the different things you've got to do at the time, right? Not your fault. Everything else, nah, you didn't do anything wrong. You're a customer who had some very specific needs, and you're right. I'm 99% sure this guy was a manager. Just from the way he was talking to you and the way his staff talked to you when he wasn't there, right? I know because I've lived this. Like me and the other staffer, when the Games Workshop manager wasn't around, had amazing interactions with customers and sold more models. Like literally sold more models. Go figure. Anyway, that's that one. So I will be back. Oh wow, that was nearly an hour. I'll be back tomorrow for some more hobby rantage, and then on Friday for some more hobby nightmares. So love you all long time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. All right. See ya. Bye now.